I heard from both Sarah Martin from Manzanita.
Okay.
She said that both her and LaSara are not able to join us today.
Okay.
Same thing for Rachel.
Rachel McAdams, or
No, from Senior Center, Rachel McDavid.
so she's on maternity leave.
As of November.
Oh, okay.
Or through November, soon through November. She contacted me today.
Oh, she's not quite on maternity leave yet?
Right.
Okay.
Let me look at her email to get exactly right.
Does it look like we'll have a quorum though?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
Maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, Dan's gone too.
Oh, I just got one from Blythe. Okay, I'm gonna send Blythe the link. She's going on maternity leave this week and will be out until November.
So she's probably not coming.
No, she's not.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hi, Blythe. We're just kind of hanging tight, waiting for people to join so we have a quorum.
So Veronica, how many people would we need to be a quorum?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 7. And I have 2. Angelica and Heather are joining now.
Is Heather counts?
Yes. She's our identified rep for this.
Hello, sorry. Had a hard time getting on.
I have a call from, I think it's Judy. Hold on just a second. Mendocino County, this is Veronica. Judy's having difficulty getting in. I just resent her the link. She should be joining us soon.
Judy should be.
Yeah, Judy, Albert.
Okay. Should we start even without her, knowing we will have a quorum, or it's 1:06?
We can do that. That's fine.
You think so?
Yeah.
Shannon, so do you want to call us to order, Shannon? I know you might be back and forth or distracted.
Sorry, I had too many windows open on my laptop couldn't get back to the meeting. Sure, let's call the meeting to order. Veronica, would you go ahead and do roll call for us, please?
Okay, so don't forget to unmute. Please let me know when you're here, when I call your name. Angelica Mion,
I'm here.
Blythe Post,
Here.
Connie Bailey,
Here.
Dan McIntyre, Elizabeth Elliott, Heather Chris,
Here.
Judy Albert,
Here.
with Sarah Allen or Sarah Martin, Lisa Judd,
Here.
Paul Davis, Rachel McDavid said she couldn't make it today, Shannon Riley,
Here.
and Tabitha Miller.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we just have a quorum.
We do.
So excellent. And everybody here knows everybody, right? We don't have any visitors and no public comment that you're aware of, Veronica?
I've received no requests for public comment, and I don't have any members of the public who joined the meeting, and Elizabeth Elliott is logging in right now.
Perfect.
I'm gonna
Thank
mark
you.
her as present.
Okay.
Hi, Elizabeth, we've got you marked in.
Okay, if we move on to number 3, review and discussion of the current status of the strategic plan.
Sure, I'll pick up
Thank you.
that item. So what you should be looking at in your packet begins on page 6. I think I did things a little bit out of order here. So we approved the strategic plan in like April 2020, something like that. And then it was adopted by all of the jurisdictions in the following months. But as a committee, we haven't really gone back, it's like a year later, over a year later, and identified where we were, if it needs adjustments, and just kind of like, what are we doing now in terms of the strategic plan? So what I put in your packets today was just the section of the strategic plan that was organized by goals and strategies and action steps. And what I had added into it were my rough notes on our actions taken and or pending to date for each of those categories. But there's a couple of there's sort of some bigger questions I have for the committee, and then also Veronica and I are ready to take direction on how to proceed with this. So I think the first area where I'm looking for direction is how does this board want to update this strategic plan? We're in a strange situation because other jurisdictions have adopted the strategic plan, but I don't really have access to all of their information on what they're doing that might be relevant to the strategic plan. So I can give status updates on what the CoC is doing or is funding. And I don't really know how the committee wants to gather and relate actions relevant to the strategic plan that are being taken by other bodies, either individual organizations or other jurisdictions. So I'm going to pause there and welcome input.
So what if we gathered feedback from the jurisdictions? Like, we know that you've adopted this strategic plan. It's, an evolving document. It's a living document, right? That we're going to be constantly kind of making those adjustments on our end as the CoC and making those recommendations. But what if we go back to them and ask them at this point in time, have you implemented anything in regards to the strategic plan, of ways that you guys are doing anything, so that as we're reviewing this document, we are taking into consideration that may impact something that they have maybe already implemented. I don't know. And then at that point, we would review those goals and make our updates and potentially present to the board, our whole group, for those approvals, and then send that back out then to the jurisdictions to either adopt or continue on with what they had already previously adopted That would be just my suggestion, and that letting them know that this is going to be an ongoing thing, that we would like to know if they've done anything with that potentially to take into consideration with our changes, and then we would send it back to them. I don't know.
We could do that. I'm almost seeing it kind of almost like a survey format in a way to the jurisdictions.
I have a question about that, Megan, because very few of the items were actually tasked to the jurisdictions, and technically the jurisdictions, my recollection at least, is that they endorsed it rather than adopting it. So they basically said, yes, we approve of this plan, go ahead and do it. But in reality, very few of these tasks are within the purview of the jurisdictions. So do you also mean service providers, or?
Probably both. I mean, I haven't, I'm just asking this question to get the feedback. I think where I was thinking the jurisdictions could weigh in, Shannon, is even like goal 1.1, which is source new housing opportunities of all types whenever possible. And although I listed the 3 projects that CoC supported funding wise, there's a lot of other things going on housing wise, in the community. So I think you're right that the jurisdictions may not have that much to weigh in on a lot of these, but there's some that are quite important that I think they would want to be able to, or I would like to be able to acknowledge.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I also have the challenge of there's other areas of the county that are doing things. I mean, like, God, that I'm thinking promote meaningful expansion of mental health and substance use treatment. There's a whole lot of stuff going on there, but including through Measure B. So I think there's a lot of people I could ask, what are they doing? I don't necessarily mean like you're responsible for this, but it would be good to be able to reflect what's happening, I think.
I agree with that. Yeah.
It seems to me that you're going to have to identify, some of the sources that probably have the information. Some of them might be just county sources, but otherwise, even smaller. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot going on that we are unaware of. But the other thing is this is such a strange time because of the pandemic that never ends. So some of these things are probably just kind of on back burners also because the services haven't been able to be expanded because of the outreach.
Right. It's a funny thing. I mean, in some areas, I think there's been tremendous activity. I'm thinking of the hotel-based programs or
yes,
there's like a huge amount of work being done that's unexpected in other areas. Yeah. I mean, my second question to the committee was there's large swaths of the strategic plan that are completely undone. And how do we want to handle that? So that's the second question, but let me try to like get myself and Veronica some direction here on this. Would it make sense to send out a survey to both jurisdictions and service providers? And Shannon, I would not imply that they should have been doing any of this, but if you happen to be doing any of this, let us know about it. Like, it's not that you were assigned this work necessarily, but sometimes people are doing things that are good to know about. And I'd like to give them credit for it publicly. So I think that would be maybe the route we would take on that. I think that one of the areas that we have not done at all is more organized communication about what is happening around homelessness. And, we just keep having the same things recycled out in the community forever. Nothing is being done, lots of money, those general themes, which is just not true. I mean, the lots of money part might be, but I think we haven't been able to communicate well what has happened and what we're still working on. And honestly, about what we're literally not doing, I think is also important to keep in mind. So
I think that's a great direction to go in, to be able to capture the data of both the jurisdictions and the service providers will give us a better idea of where we're at, and then how to task the stuff that's not being done in the strategic plan as well.
That's true. Like, I think you might be right, Elizabeth. I might need to get that information first before we figure out how to adjust goals, because maybe there's things happening that I didn't know, which would be great if that's the case. Okay, Veronica, do you have any thoughts about that?
So I'm processing what needs to be done to accomplish this.
Mhm.
And I want to make sure that I have an understanding of what needs to be done. One, we need to convey an update on what has been done by the county and the CoC. And we're trying to also gather what the other jurisdictions and service providers have done as well. To do that, we want to do a survey. Do we want to just ask them, hey, look, the one that you provided the update, a cleaner version of it where they can just fill in updates? Do we want to do it in that way? Or do I want to have some narrative questions that inform that process? And I'm not sure what it would look like.
I think if we just send them this document, like a large mailing list, and say, send them this document and say, let us know what you're doing this, they won't do it. They'll just like space it out, right? Everyone's not. So I think if it's like, click on this link and fill out a survey, we'll actually have more likelihood, or some narrative questions. So I was trying to think both, like, we want the information, but we also want it not to be burdensome for people to respond. So
maybe like 4 questions, 1 for each goal. And I could have like a narrative on top, and it could be like a Google form that they follow the link, they fill it out, and then automatically populate for me. And it might be easier to process.
I think a Google form could work well. So we can work on that, or we can contract it out, Veronica, to somebody who else can do it. So that's something I'm trying to think too, like if there's tasks that I can assign elsewhere.
Also to Veronica, just to note, when I'm soliciting responses from folks and I'm using that Google, like a Survey Monkey, it oftentimes will give you the amount of time that it takes to complete. And I know for very busy, like superintendents or principals or things like that, when I put in the subject line, 7-minute survey or 5-minute survey, that's helpful to prepare people for the response time that is needed of them.
Okay. I will that through the Google Forms.
So my only fear in terms of that is that the information we gather won't be that meaningful. You know, like sometimes things with just a click of the button, but you still don't know what is it that's being done.
Yeah. Do you have an idea on that, Judy? Because I actually, and let me just ask this frankly, I was thinking of me, and I'm making this up in my head right now, so it could be a bad idea, of going back to the person who helped us write the strategic plan and see if she would be interested in doing that kind of follow-up, Judy, that you're talking about.
Right. Something more detailed. So you actually get like, here's a concrete project that we have worked on that is hitting North County or something like that. That we actually, so that it's real data, not just sending it to executive directors of nonprofits plus county and then clicking things. Yes, we've, what have you done though? Because it does take more detailed ideas of what have you done.
Megan, are you suggesting that Mari, were you thinking of Mari who helped with the strategic plan?
I was. I don't know if it's, when she first helped with the strategic plan, she wasn't an elected official. I'm trying to figure out if it makes a difference now. It may or may not. Maybe it does. I don't know.
I don't think she has there's no financial gain for her by facilitating this process. So in my mind, it would be okay. I guess I'm curious, are you thinking that we would just get some cursory responses to people like, yes, we have developed new housing in our jurisdiction. And then someone like Mari would follow up with that person and say, hey, you responded. Could we get some?
Tell me more.
Yeah. Is okay. All right.
I mean, again, I'm making this up as we're meeting. So it's just not a well-formed thought. It just, I'm really mindful of, we have so many areas of our strategic plan that are completely undone. If I pull Veronica into just updating, it's less time spent on the actual things itself. So I'm really just trying to figure out what I can.
I actually think that's a really great idea. And I think that hits on Judy's point of getting more thorough information in specific direction.
And she certainly knows this plan well.
Right. So, she's familiar with it. Yeah.
It'd be an easy pick, to pick up and go with it. And in some ways, it's a little more neutral, really,
I agree.
than Veronica and I having to do it. Not that we're not, I like to think we're somewhat neutral, but I mean, it's just, it might be better to have a third party kind of do this work.
She does seem like she has time for a project.
You know, Veronica and I can try to sort this through. I think we probably can find some funding that could be appropriate for this. Veronica, I'll talk to you about that offline, but we probably could to pay her to do that.
We've got HAP funding for it.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think that's helpful. Maybe we'll head in that direction. If Mari's available and willing, I kind of would like to get it going pretty soon, just so that we don't let this sit too long. The second part is, and maybe we can't have this conversation right now, but there are vast swaths, maybe not vast. There's some swaths of this plan that we've really done like very, very little about. And particularly I'm concerned about community and policymaker engagement. Maybe that's not the one. It's really like 3.3 kind of outreach and public relations. We talked about this. This is the kind of thing that always completely falls by the wayside of almost anything anyone does, is the actual communication around it. But it feels somewhat important to me. So I just wanted to have that conversation with the group. We have done no like deliberate public information things, nothing like that around communicating both the realities of homelessness and or what's being done about it. So thoughts about that?
Part of this will come with our annual presentations, which will only make sense to do after we've updated the plan, I think. So it's going to be a little more probably than a year after the last presentations, but clearly delivering information in person has been a challenge this year.
That's true. Right.
But I actually think the work that you, Megan, and the county did in terms of outreach regarding Project Home Key was really helpful, even to the extent of, you know, developing a website that people can just go to. So I would count that amongst the work that has been done, even though it was targeted.
It's true.
Well, you know, and I'm wondering, you know, I know that newspapers are not really what a lot of people use for their information source, but you know, there have been some pretty, I think, successful in-depth articles that have been written
That's true.
in the Ukiah Daily Journal and the Willits News, and then, you know, around various topics that really are primary of interest in this county, whether it's the cannabis referendums or whatever. And I actually think homelessness is and remains a very hot topic, and most of what gets written is the negative impacts and not what has been done and what it seems to be working. And, you know, they have some good writers, you know, seemingly at the Journal, who sometimes really like spend some time doing that, interviewing you, Megan, interviewing Veronica, interviewing, you know, Dan, or, you know, whatever, just to say, look at, this is the progress that's been made since whatever, you know, with some kind of a big headline that sounds, you know, that would be a little bit more like we're moving in the right direction.
No, that's a good point, Judy. And maybe the timing of this is that if I can get Mari to do this and she agrees and she does do an update of a strategic plan, it could result in a press release around that actual thing. And particularly if we time it with annual presentations to the jurisdictions, which Shannon and I had forgotten was one of the things we're going to do. And it does say it on here. And you're right, we're not that far off from an annual from when the jurisdictions adopted it, which was about a year ago.
Yeah, we postponed some of those presentations because we still didn't know if in-person meetings were going to be a thing or not. So we were waiting, and then we ended up doing them virtually. And so it was, you know, September, I think, before we did those. But I was going to suggest the same thing. Mari's actually a very good writer. The Journal does almost no investigative journalism
Right.
Karen Rifkin will do some kind of community
Right.
interest stories if you engage her. But in my experience, the journal will print, they're lazy, they will print anything you give them, particularly if it sounds like an article, even more so if you attach a picture to it. And so Mari's a really good writer. And so if there are funds for her to help us flesh out and develop this strategic plan update, maybe she could incorporate some articles around that too.
That would be great. Then that would really take some of the, then we're both updating our strategic plan and actually doing something that we said we're going to do in our strategic plan all in one activity,
Right.
or one kind of contract. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Letting the community know.
Okay. Veronica, how's that sound to you?
Just real quick, would this committee be okay or be open to using our state HAP funds that are allowed to be used for local planning and strategic planning? It's totally for that. But is the committee okay with us using some of those funds for this? That's where I want to take it.
And just to be clear, this will not be a large contract. I mean, especially if
No.
we split it between the county and the CoC side of that, and Veronica, I'm sure it'll be less than $10,000.
Yeah.
Would you like a vote on that, Veronica, or how would you, just a consensus?
That might be.
I think, is there any objections? Because we don't have it noted in the agenda
As an action item. Maybe we can have it as a very brief action item, Veronica, at the next board meeting, like not a long thing, just like for that under HAP, because we've spent literally $0 of this CoC's HAP allocation, and that just keeps, we're on round 3 already.
Yes, I can do that. But I'd like to know if the committee has any objections to doing that. That way I can say, hey, everybody's okay with it. It's strategic planning.
I'd like to see it as an action item before I make a full.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't necessarily think would be in an objection to it, but I think that potentially, again, when we talk about money and transparency, like public view of what, we're spending money on with contracts, I don't know, just maybe something that the community at large may see it as, why are we spending money for contracts or contracting out when it's something that could be done locally or within house? I don't know, just to put out there.
We had talked about most of this stuff, especially the media or whatever. It isn't any individual's job within any agency to do it. And so in order for someone to be able to spend time to do it, finding some sort of approved funding source to contract that to a specific person.
Well, how about this? It's not agendized as an action item anyway. So how about if Veronica and I continue to think about an appropriate funding source and then bring it to the next CoC meeting? Because Veronica, we may realize that we want to, we have a very large administrative overhead for the ESG. I mean, we need to think, but I want to think that through with you about whether that, so there might be more, there might be a couple different options here, or some cash money that we need to spend up. Like, I'm not sure what it would be yet. HAP is certainly a fallback. Do you have thoughts there, Veronica?
Yeah, well, I just want to write exactly what I'm writing for the minutes. I said the committee is open to using HAP, ESG, cash, or other similar funds for this contract to do strategic planning, but wants it to go to the full CoC board as an action item for approval.
Does that work with you? I mean, contracting takes a
good.
while. I have to reach out to Mari. She has no idea we're even talking about this. So if, we'll be okay if we wait till the next CoC board meeting.
Maybe she's watching it on YouTube right now.
It would be great if there is support from the full board, if there was a way to make this a line item in the annual budget. I don't know if we'd want to do a budget amendment for this year or just think about it in the future, but we have stated through the strategic plan that this kind of PR is important to us. We've acknowledged that none of us have the capacity in our current roles to take it on. So if we should allocate some funds, I think, on a more permanent basis so that we don't have to contract every time we do it. We can just say, okay, we've already budgeted for this.
Okay, well, let Veronica and I think that through and see how we could do that. I mean, I could see some sort of way we could it'll be easier if we use HAP, but let Veronica, you and I can talk about it offline and see if there's a funding source that we could at least commit the next 2 or 3 years so that it's not something we have to revisit constantly, but is already kind of embedded.
And it is a line item in the CoC planning grant budget, but it's only $47,000, so it doesn't go very far. And so we use the other grant to support those same activities because they're allowable expenses under there. So it's like our CoC planning grant really drives what we do and how we do it. And we have other financial supports to help us do that. So we do have a CoC budget that is listed, including subcontractors.
Okay, well, that is helpful. That gives us somewhere to go with this. I do want to just remind the strategic planning committee, in case you need this language out in the world, which I constantly do. People out in the world still want to say, what about the Marbert report? Why aren't you doing the Marbert report? Blah, 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 blah. And I just want to remind everyone that I kept the sheet of paper that we talked about in the strategic plan, and 20 of the 28 recommendations from Marbert report are incorporated into the strategic plan. And the few that we did not incorporate, there was deliberate reasons why we did not. So I'm finding myself having to say that again. So I'm just giving that back to you guys as information.
Dr. Marbert 2.0.
Yes. We spent a long time, remember, deconstructing Dr. Marbert and deciding what we So, okay, I'm going to move us on, if that's okay with everyone, to item 4. Or Shannon, you want to lead this or carry on? Okay.
Go for it.
So item 4 is a review and discussion of the current membership of the governing board. I think in like a perfectly functioning world, this would have been handled by a really robust, perfectly functioning membership committee, which is not quite what we have right now. So I'm putting it to the strategic planning committee. And I'll just to give you just a quick background of where we are. The Mendocino County was included in a state audit, which some of you may or may not remember. Veronica remembers it extremely well because it was super onerous. And one of the recommendations that came from the state was that in order for our CoC to comply with federal regulations, we needed to ensure that the CoC's board is representative of all relevant organizations. Not all the CoCs agree with the state that they are required to include all of these organizations, but we kind of lost that battle for now. So the state wants proof from me and Veronica that we are going to include a seat on the board for businesses and colleges. Those are the two that are, according to them, missing right now. What does everybody think about that?
I just want to throw out there that I requested technical assistance around this, and the answer was that the CoC's interpretation is correct, that these are not required by federal statute. They're recommended to be on your CoC membership, but they don't have to be on the board per HUD-TA.
Right. So where we were left as the county is our charge, which we agreed to, was to go back to the CoC and encourage them to include, or just ask them to include these. If the CoC wants to say no, Veronica and I can go back and say the CoC said no, but I have to do something one way or the other in terms of, because I had my 6-month response to the audit and I was like, oh, I haven't really addressed this yet. So we have to do something. And I'm just wondering what you all think. Do we want to fight this battle and say, no, we will not add a business and college seat, or do we want to just do it?
So Megan, just for clarification, is it add those 2 seats to the governing board or just to the membership?
Board.
Oh, governing board.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of ways we could do this. The CoC could just say, no, we disagree with the interpretation. You could do that. We could reach out to the college. I think we've done it before. We could add a college seat. We could say that some members are also businesses. I think that would be a little bit of a stretch. I don't think any of the members, that would be a little disingenuous of us, but we could do that. So there's a couple ways we could go about this, or we could just give in and add 2 seats to the board, 1 for businesses and 1 for the college.
To me, it seems like if we're talking about equity in the strategic plan, why are we putting a college seat before we put tribal seats?
That's a good point.
We have 9 sovereign governments in the county and we're going to give a business a seat before that, I would object to that.
So the conversation we had earlier that we hadn't completed because we haven't had a full membership meeting, there was an intention, I believe, to have a discussion about adding a tribal seat as well, and maybe an underrepresented minorities if that was also the will of the board. So there's nothing to be saying we couldn't add that as well. But now we're looking at like maybe 4 more seats. And I would agree with you, Elizabeth. I think there's a much stronger case to say why would we not have a tribal entity seat than a business. But okay, let me back up for a second. Is there any downside of having a much bigger, a somewhat bigger board? Do we care? Do we want to limit the number of extra seats?
It's harder to make a decision with a really large board. That's the primary obstacle.
I agree. And I think the board's pretty big already. It's kind of a lot of people already.
And I think when you get a board that's too large, you have a lot of people who are willing to like let other people do the work, and they could just sit back and they say yes or no, depending upon what everybody else says.
Correct. So the state right now says that we're required to have 16 categories. We have 14 of the 16. We were considering adding probably 2 more, a tribal entity and a underrepresented minority category. So that, how many seats do we have, Veronica? We have 18, 19?
18 voting, 19 if you count me.
Right. So let's say 18. Let's not count you for this. So if we added those 4 more, that would be 22.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
That's a lot.
What is the justification for a college representative?
That's what I was
don't understand that one.
So Veronica went on and on and on. So in the law, it lists these entities that the board should be representative of. We don't believe it was requiring these 16. And one of the other organizations that was audited, I think it was Fresno, was like, no, we won't even agree at all, right? We kind of gave in after a while and said, fine, we'll go back to our CoC and talk about it. But other CoCs were like, we're not even going to talk about it. So there's definitely a dispute about whether those were required or not. And I don't know, Shannon, the colleges and businesses were just listed in this list somewhere.
So there is something that I think would be beneficial to us if we added the college. So my liaison out there, they also have a student equity team. And so the 3 populations that they identified out there as underserved populations were their Native American population, of course, African Americans, which would be our underserved populations that you're talking about, Megan, as well as foster and homeless. So if we got kind of a broad range person from that student equity team, we could then gather data on homeless that are accessing the college potentially. And, they of course don't have dormitories at Mendocino College. And so we do have a very high population of homeless students that I work with living out of cars in the Mendocino College parking lot out there. So that one I see, the businesses, I think just for their input into, what would they really bring to the table as a voting member?
Businesses are undoubtedly impacted by street level homeless.
I'll play devil's
are.
advocate on that one. I'll say like that could actually help the CoC in terms of liaisons or public
communications. Yeah.
Community. Yeah. So, but I think Elizabeth makes really strong points too. I don't love being on giant boards. So I think this is a bit of a dilemma here for sure.
I actually think all 4 of the entities that we were considering, tribal entity, college, business, and underrepresented minority. And I guess for my thought, Blythe, I was actually thinking a Latino focused organization would make sense given our demographics. I think all 4 of those would really have something to offer. It's just this double-edged sword of having an unwieldy board, which we're a little unwieldy right now. So this is the law, isn't it? We believe, in relevant organizations include is not a mandate. The state decided that was like a requirement. This is where we kind of, lost.
So this is talking about the continuum of care membership. And then this talks about what the board membership needs to be consistent of. And so this is where we have universities, which we don't have universities. They've changed it to colleges and businesses right here. So they're welcome to be part of our general membership, but it's up to us as a CoC to decide what categories consist of the board.
So what do we do?
Wow.
All right, so the downside of a 22-person board is it's a lot of people and it makes quorums harder and it's just kind of a lot. The upside is that we could have, you know, additional representation from organizations that could be really, you know, helpful board members.
Is there any way like we can do like a tryout period where folks are invited, like there's outreach to folks in the business community and college community and see if they want to attend the meetings, see what the meetings are about, see what the commitment is about, and, you know, kind of see that maybe 6 months out and then decide, make the decision of whether or not to include a board seat. Because I think a lot of it too is whether or not somebody's willing to put in the time to do it.
Right, it's true.
So what if our recommendation is that, you know, we invite those entities and they come as like a general population for our general meeting and kind of get the feel for our group? And then like Angelica is saying, then we look at the commitment and, you know, who's showing up consistently, who's invested in participating. And then maybe we put it to a vote for adding one of those board seats for that particular organization.
We could do that. I mean, the question that it brings up to me is that we have some existing seats whose participation has been spotty. I'll call out the hospital for a moment here. So I'm not sure if we should, you know, it seems a little bit like these organizations have to have a trial when we have some existing ones.
Right.
So I don't know whether we put everybody on a trial. I don't, you know, I'm not sure what, and sort of say like, if you're not showing up consistently in all of these, we kind of have to have another conversation. I'm not sure, you know, about that, but.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask Megan, because, you know, I am sure, you know, with the roll call and sometimes we're asking, do we have a quorum and everything like that, you know, oftentimes it's more like the same 12 people that are there rather than some of the other missing pieces.
Right.
Yeah, so it is kind of interesting because I think all four of the people who are suggested, you know, maybe would be a good addition. Like, just think if you got a realtor.
That would be fun.
who came onto the board, who was really willing to find folks housing.
I think actually a realtor would be great. I mean, that would fit the business category too, and it would be.
Yeah, that's
very
what I'm
useful.
thinking. That would be really good.
I agree. You know, this is not a kickback board. I mean, we meet every month. There's committee expectations that people may or may not be meeting. I mean, it is a little bit, you know, it's a heavy responsibility. So I was trying to think if we could, you know, I had been wondering if we wanted to move to meetings every other month, but to kind of balance the expectation, but then it's even more important that people show up every other month. So,
right.
Yeah.
So Megan, what would be the downside if we went back to the state after they said do this? What is there ramification or like?
I don't know. I'm not sure. You know, it was a funny audit because they can't audit the CoC. They had to audit the county. So all of their recommendations are the county is encouraged to get the CoC to do this, right? But they don't actually have authority over the CoC. So we could go, I just have to prove that we had this conversation and some sort of action was taken. So if you're going to say, no, we won't do this, I need to show a board action that happened. Right. So, cause right now we just haven't done anything about it. I kind of forgot about it. So.
And do we have anything for seats that just remain open for too long and we don't get anyone in those seats? Is there anything?
Well, where we've struggled with that as individuals who are or were formerly homeless. I mean, we do have an individual, but the attendance has not been great. So I haven't gone back and looked at attendance much. You know, I could do that. I just haven't looked at it in that structured way.
So Megan, I don't know if this is a conversation for this committee, but I'm just thinking, you know, for my like foster youth executive advisory committee, we can help pay to get previous foster youth there. I just don't, is there any stipend maybe for someone that's experiencing homelessness right now to actually be a participant? Or, I mean, we probably can't use federal funds for that or state funds for that, but just an idea of like someone that's really struggling, you know, like I have families that can barely even get out to my office at MCOE to pick up backpacks and school supplies for their kids. And so just to pay for the gas money for them to actually arrive and participate. I just don't know. I don't know if that would change, you know.
Well, it might be a technical problem of not having the Zoom link, and because we've been meeting, you know, remotely for so long. And, you know, I mean,
Right.
Oftentimes a homeless person, suddenly their phone isn't working for 3 weeks or a month or.
You know, I think also that this is sort of dry. This isn't, you know,
Right.
It
I
might not be
agree.
that captivating to.
I agree.
Sometimes it's not that captivating to me, right? So like, I think, you know, we're paid to be here. So I think that that's also a bit of the challenge.
Yes, yes.
I'm not, but I can check with Veronica. There might be right now some incentive money for people with lived experience, but I'm not sure. I think there is right now. I don't know if it's an ongoing funding source.
Yes, CSGCV has it, and I'm sure we could argue half for it as
Yeah,
well.
right.
It's under street outreach.
Right. So I'm guessing right now, I mean, I guess my gut instinct is 22 people is unwieldy, but these particular 4 categories we're talking about could actually be really useful. And I think it could be useful to publicly say, we have business representation on our CoC board, and we have, you know, representation from the universities and from the tribal entities. I mean, that might be important to have as a talking point, even if it makes things more complicated for us logistically.
No, and Megan, maybe there could be, you know, a recommendation. And I don't know whose job it would fall under, to just kind of take a glance over the last 6 months who hasn't been attending the board meetings and maybe do an outreach. Like, I don't know what happened to the hospital. Did that just like, they don't have anybody who represents them anymore or assigned to that?
We can do that. That probably wouldn't be that hard. And, you know, the hospital just caught my attention because I was looking at the piece of paper and I was like, oh, I haven't seen anyone from the hospital.
Well, and part of that too is there's been a lot of turnover, like the executives have all changed. And so I know that like contacts that I would always go to over there, it's like, oh, that contact isn't there anymore. And so then people will come to me like, oh, I didn't even know that, you know, MCOE and the hospital were kind of in communications about these things because somebody else stepped in. So I think that may be just a kind of barrier in just changeover over there as well.
I agree. Are we getting close to a motion on this? Is anyone comfortable making a motion?
So are we making a motion to make the recommendation that we are not going to open our board up to 22 voting members?
I heard the opposite.
Well, we'd have to make a motion one way or the other.
Is it something that should go to the board, the whole board?
The board will need to approve it one way or the other, but I didn't know if you were comfortable. I mean, we could repeat this whole conversation at the board level as well. I mean, and that's fair. If you are all like, we can't really decide, we could do that. If you want to just punt the whole conversation to the board, we could.
And our next meeting is a full membership meeting, so we could get everybody's input at the next meeting.
We could do that. Do you want to do that? Just have it be a board conversation. It sounds like you guys are not.
I think so, because I think that even if we make a motion on it today and then bring it back to the board, I think that other people on the board are going to have a lot to say anyway. So we might as well just make it an agenda item and then discuss it there.
Okay, you're right. We'll be repeating this conversation anyway.
Exactly.
So you guys just have a heads up, but we'll have the same conversation. Are you comfortable with that, Veronica?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like we're taking no action. You're just referring this topic to the full board for discussion. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right. So we're moving on to item 5, which is another one. You may want to punt to the board, but we'll see. So I'm going to introduce this briefly, but Veronica may have more to add to this. The Homeless Housing Assistance Program, HAP. We're working on accepting allocation for round 3. And as just a reminder to this committee, We've done very little with round 1 or round 2, and now we're on round 3, and there's also talk of round 4. So this is this seems to be the kind of vehicle separate from all the pandemic money that the state is using to allocate funds for homeless use in California. And there seems to be every indication that it's going to be somewhat of an ongoing funding source, at least for now. So in the very beginning of HAP round 1, so a little bit of background, when HEAP came all to the COCs and not to the counties, some of the counties freaked out, right? And so then moving forward, the state was like, oh, we have to split up this funding and give half to the county and half to the COC. And that's the method that's being used right now. But there was a commitment, a strong need for both COCs and counties to commit to working together so that there was not a bunch of confusion over who was funding what and blah, blah, blah. So in round 1, we wrote a letter and the county wrote a letter, explaining our commitment to work collaboratively on this fund. Now that we're at round 3, Veronica has explained that we are getting very heavy pressure to actually apply together. They're like forcing collaboration. So we had, we had a kind of quasi subcommittee type situation where 2 board of supervisors and the co-chairs were supposed to meet together in some sort of like collaborative way to collaborate on HAP funding. That vaguely got in place right before the pandemic, and then everything fell apart after that. And at least one of those board of supervisors is no longer on the board of supervisors. So we're at the moment now where we need to decide how we're going to collaborate with the county. And this is really silly because, Veronica and I work for the county too. So how are we going to put a structure in place to work collaboratively with the county on homeless funding and projects, not just the funding, but like the work of addressing homelessness. So I'll stop there and see if Veronica has anything to add.
I'd like to add my own personal perspective that it's very burdensome to complete almost 2 identical applications, have to do 2 almost identical budgets, and do twice the reporting. It's literally double the amount of work that I have to do whenever the COC and the county have the same funding source that they apply to separately. And the whole point of this money is so that counties, COCs, and the 13 large cities start to collaborate, that they can do things in their communities together. And so the county and the COC saying, no, I'm going to take my money and we're going to do what we want, really goes against the whole idea behind why we're getting these funds. Governor Newsom, in his budget, there's huge amounts of homeless services, and in order to pull them off, we can't be siloed. So let's use this money the way that it's meant to be done. Let's use it together. And please don't make my life hard. That's all.
So just some considerations for this committee. If you form like an actual committee, it becomes a whole Brown Act thing. And so like that's just something to think about for both bodies, both the COC and in this case, the Board of Supervisors. So that's just a factor out there. It has some pluses and minuses to being a Brown Act, Brown Act governed thing, but that's just one way to approach it. So what we're looking for you today is so discussion and action on the formation of a collaborative work group or whatever you want to call it, with a recommendation to the board on how we do this collaboration.
Megan, I have a question. I apologize if you answered this already. I had to step away for a second. Obviously, administration has changed. The entire structure of Hhsa is kind of changing. I understand this is a request to the Board of Supervisors, but do you have a sense of whether you have the support of the administration?
No, I don't yet. So I was starting here and then I would go there. I haven't had this conversation with anybody in the administration yet, because honestly, I just don't no one's really been paying attention to it. So I don't know what the reception will be.
Okay, because I feel like this is really important, but it would be a good, I guess, going into this to know who's going to go to bat for you.
That's true. So if I'm sitting here as like not Megan County employee, but Megan CoC, you know, facilitator type, let's just see how does the CoC feel about that? How do you feel? I mean, Veronica's really true. There's a whole logistical like workload involved in doing 2 separate paths. That's a real pain in the ass. But there's also a philosophical question here that we need honesty about. I mean, how comfortable are you all deferring decision-making, not deferring, but including decision-making with elected officials who haven't always been, you know, they've had strong opinions about how things should be done.
Well, and you have no idea, like how do Board of Supervisors get appointed to these committees based on their interest, based on their knowledge, based on?
Well, I think if we just look at past history, and Shannon's right, administration has changed. When we had that kind of faltering, well, you know, it wasn't faltering. We had that little work group thing going on, and it was Supervisors Dan Jurdy and Supervisors John McCowan. Both of them, but John McCowan in particular, was very in the weeds with homelessness issues, right?
Yes.
It's debatable whether that's an appropriate role for an elected official, but for whatever reason, he was right there. Both of them wanted to be right there in terms of like even small funding decisions around homelessness when the county had some control over that money. So they were right there. There may be a different feel right now. There's certainly an argument to be said that an actual Board of Supervisors being on a work group about small funding decisions doesn't totally make sense, but I don't know how they'll feel, right? This is a very public, you know, issue that people have strong feelings about. So I don't know whether on the county side, this kind of decision-making would be kept at a Board of Supervisors level, deferred to county leadership level, or honestly, I could see it going all the way to being deferred to like Veronica and I, which is also kind of crazy, right? So I don't know the spectrum there. I think a recommendation from the CoC would be listened to. So if you all had an opinion about how that could happen, may or may not be granted, but it would be interesting to know. So I think, Judy, we're dealing with a lot of unknowns here in terms of even setting up what the structure should look like.
So am I picking up that, you know, I'm picking up from that, Megan, that there was some negativity of having them involved because of some of the micromanaging.
You know, I wouldn't say negativity. I would say it's not always done that way, but you know, typically elected officials are not that far in the weeds on a funding decision like this. But I wouldn't say negativity. I would just say that was at that moment in time what felt very important to those 2 Board of Supervisors and the county overall.
Okay.
But it may not, that level of interest in being that involved may not be true anymore. I honestly don't know.
Right.
I would suggest that based on my experience with Measure B and a couple of supervisors who are also very in the weeds on funding decisions, that it would be really important that that working group be balanced with staff and elected officials, that we don't, there needs to be balance. So, and I'm completely
balance
supportive.
Between, sorry, Shannon, I just want to make sure, balance between staff and electeds, or?
Yeah. Yes. Staff and electeds, you know, and I'm very comfortable with current staff, specifically Megan and Veronica. We need to consider that they might be pulled in other directions too, and somebody completely new could be tasked with this. I don't know what the likelihood of that is, but the rate at which the county is kind of blowing up departments and moving people around, it does seem like that's fairly likely. So we do need to make sure that our decision is based on kind of positions, not specific personalities.
Mhm. Right. And right now, the HAP funding flows through the Department of Social Services. I guess there's no reason it couldn't go through a different entity, but I don't see any interest in changing that right now. But that's where it is right now. So I'm trying to think whether this is premature and Veronica and I need to go back to leadership and kind of figure out what they're thinking on our side, or I'm just not sure, chicken before the egg. I'm not quite sure which one we should do. And I'll be really clear, Judy, county leadership is doesn't even know this is a thing, right? Like I haven't talked, there's no, like, we haven't even had this conversation really.
Right.
And so it's not that there's any, I think no one's been paying attention to it yet because
No,
we haven't
they've
really
been-
had to
they've-
force this kind of collaboration yet.
They've been paying attention to cannabis.
Probably.
I think it's an important discussion to broach with administration. I think it shows the CoC being proactive about effective implementation of these funds and of the strategic plan. I don't know what I would defer to Megan's recommendation on the best way to do that, but I would recommend conversations with administration, upper level staff, maybe before this goes to the Board of Supervisors.
So maybe what we could do, here's an idea. This committee could recommend that, for example, either the CoC co-chairs or two people you appoint from this committee meet with the Director of Social Services and probably somebody from the CEO's office to just have an initial conversation about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And then take it from there, maybe.
That sounds good to me.
So who do you think should be on the CoC side in that collaborative conversation? Because unless somebody has a better concept for me, I think I would probably start with the Director of Social Services and maybe my boss, who is the assistant CEO on the county side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like to volunteer people who aren't here. So Dan McIntyre, I think, would be a good fit.
I think there's some cases for including Dan and Jackie because they were part of that very original, like kind of 4-person. And then I remember because it was this 4 people and Tammy was there at the time and I was there just kind of there. But so they have had at least some experience with the beginnings of this conversation before it all fell apart.
And I'm of course being facetious, but they are the co-chairs of the board and eminently qualified as well. And I think, enough history and experience in this arena to have the respect of the administration.
Okay. Veronica, when do you have to submit the application?
Oh, it's not until March. It's due in
Okay.
March. So we have plenty of time. They're just telling us, hey, this is in the regulations and we're seeing it. So when you're ready, when it's time, you need to be ready.
Okay.
And the letter says that it would be represent a minimum of CoC co-chair, CoC's administrative entity lead, so myself or Megan, keep ad hoc committee member, which is the Board of Supervisors, what they called it, and the HHSA director or her designee. So those were the 4 people originally identified. It can change, but.
And that HEAP ad hoc committee was disbanded. So that's where our challenge was. It was disbanded and not resurrected. So that was at the end of 2020. So then I think we have a good case to go back and say, originally we committed to this, ad hoc committee that doesn't exist anymore. So how do we do this now? Okay, I think let's see, do I need a motion? Can I have a motion on that? It would be, I think, better for Veronica and I to be able to have some actual action on this. Is anyone ready to make that motion, or maybe Veronica, you can suggest it?
So you guys want to create a work group with the county and you want us to reach out to the appropriate people to start that discussion? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
I think it's not quite the work group yet because we don't know who the county wants to put onto that work group. So I think it's direct you and I, Veronica, to set up a meeting with the co-chairs, the Director of Social Services, and the CEO's office to collaboratively discuss this topic and how we may want to proceed. Is that because Shannon's right. The county could be like, no, we refuse to collaborate. I mean, I don't think they will, but they could just say, we're really unwilling to cede anything to do with this dollars to anybody. I mean, you know, we got to leave room for that, right?
Oh.
Okay.
So direct staff to schedule a meeting between the CoC co-chair, I put in parentheses an S, so it's one for both, County Social Services Branch Director and County CEO Office to explore how to approach collaboratively, or how to explore collaboratively approach applying to round 3? Or
A collaborative approach, the implementation of HAP programs. It's really for HAP for all from the beginning, really, right? Since we had, I mean, it should, I don't want to only focus on round 3. Round 3 is forcing us to have this conversation, but it's really relevant to all of HAP.
okay, so to explore implementation of the HAP program.
Right. Just to put a little tiny thing out there that I'm anticipating is going to be kind of the challenges we are going to have working collaboratively is that, you know, there are some county policies that might be in conflict with the way some of our community-based organizations want to work. For example, the county now has a very strict policy around gift cards. This is a tiny little thing, right? But the county does not allow gift cards to be issued to clients. That's an important outreach technique to some organizations. So there could be some philosophical things that will become something we'll have to address when we are committed to working collaboratively together. So is that a motion on the table? Veronica, we have a motion. I think, can somebody make a motion to what Veronica just said?
I'll move to make a motion for what Veronica just said to start that conversation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I have to do a
Aye.
roll call vote for
Okay.
Brown Act. So when I call your name, please say yes, no, or abstain, and Helica has left live.
Yes.
Tawny? Tawny, you're muted. Are you there? I need you. We don't have a quorum without you. Okay, I'm going to come back to Tawny. Elizabeth,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Judy,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Shannon,
I read her lips. It was a yes.
She said yes. Yeah, she said
okay,
yes.
she says yes. Okay, Tawny, are you there?
I'm trying to
Okay,
call her cell phone right now.
It's okay. We're gonna say that she's abstained. And so motion passed.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to our last agenda item. This is more just an informational item. We've listed on your agenda the proposals that were received for ESG CV funding, and we are in the process of working on contracts for those proposals, pretty much in the order that they are listed here, sort of. We're trying to prioritize the contracts that need to be in place before an organization runs out of money or that are high priority for us. Some of these organizations have existing contracts in place that are not going to end until December or something like that. So they're a little bit of lower priority on our practice of moving through these funds. But I do want to note that in spite of our best efforts, unless something changes, and Veronica, you should weigh in here, I think it's likely we will not spend the full ESG CV allocation by the timeline of September 30th, 2020. So I'll just put that out there right now. It's a significant allocation it's not, it's somewhat flexible, but it's not wide open. And, we're really faced with the capacity of all organizations, including the county, as being one of our limitations in terms of just, people to do the work in some sense.
Is there any opportunity for an extension or to roll over those funds at all? No, use it or lose it?
That's how it is right now, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Published by Congress, can't move it.
Yeah. And I will say again, I had hoped for some kind of new players maybe, or new ideas. And I'm not saying the ideas that were put forward were not good ones, but we don't have any radically new, expansive concepts here. Although, yeah, that's not really true. That's not really true. I think what we're really struck with is a short timeline for a large amount of funding in the middle of a pandemic. That's kind of really what we were handed. So, are there any questions on the proposals received or the plan Veronica and I are trying to put together?
I do have a question regarding NorCal Christian Ministries. Is there any restriction on using public funds for a faith-based organization?
Nope, it's allowed.
No.
They're allowable as long as they're a nonprofit
Okay.
faith-based organization.
Okay, thank you.
I think we also, I mean, there's this is just a high level view of the proposals and what the review teams, it really doesn't really reflect what the review team discussed, but NorCal Christian Ministries, we were going to ask, I don't know if they've accepted yet, but we did, because this committee wanted some of the work to be geographically spread out. So we didn't have any proposals, for example, asking to do street outreach in Willits or North County. So we were going to ask NorCal Christian Ministries if they would be willing to do that area. So we were using the existing proposals to try to fill gaps that we saw geographically as well.
So can you remind me again of the specifics of what the ESG funding can be used for specifically, Veronica? Because I know we had kind of talked about, I mean, obviously my food program and whatnot, but I don't think it qualifies under any of those programs. But I'm just wondering specifically to kind of get an idea of what that can be used for.
It's absolutely an eligible expense for food. There's a whole host of different services that are eligible to provide through an emergency shelter program, through a street outreach program, through rapid rehousing services that can also be used for homeless prevention. We have a tiny little bit for relocation for people experiencing at risk of homelessness. It can, so if you have focus groups and you want to incentivize your participants to come, you could, incentives are included in that under the current waiver that Congress has given us. So absolutely, food, transportation.
Veronica, but how could food be done if it's not a rapid rehousing or emergency shelter project?
Street outreach. It's an eligible.
If they're not on the street?
Well, if they have to be they have to meet the literal definition of homelessness.
Literal homelessness.
So they have to be in a shelter, on the streets, in their car, place not meant for human habitation. There's some
hotels, motels wouldn't meet that definition.
No, it does. That's emergency shelter. If it's paid for by a government agency or somebody else, if they're paying for it themselves, they're not homeless. But if anybody else is paying it for them, they're in non-congregate shelter.
Blythe, maybe you should have a conversation with Veronica offline.
Yeah.
It's not McKinney-Vento, but it might be some of your families, which might be annoying to you. So you might, yeah, but maybe you could have that conversation offline too.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
So any questions or thoughts about the ESG situation?
Have you heard anything that how the state might, if a lot of money gets sent back to them, they might reformat that, Megan, or?
I don't know.
They would look at other CoCs that have used their funds and could use more, and they'll try to reallocate it to them, so the state doesn't lose it.
Oh, okay.
But I will say, and Veronica might have more up-to-date information than I do. When I spoke with our ESG contacts a couple of weeks ago, we were not alone in not being able to spend this rapidly. So I think a lot of COCs are in the same situation. I mean, are you saying no, that is true, or that is, Veronica?
You're absolutely right. We've all had trouble spending it.
Right.
We're in the same boat as everybody else.
That's everyone across the state. It's like all of our foster and homeless programs for the state. They're like, hurry up and spend all the money, spend all the money. But during a pandemic, it's like, now we have all the money falling from the sky. And during the regular times, we can't serve families and people. And now we have all the money we can possibly handle and we can't spend the money. It's so crazy.
It is really crazy. I agree. It's super crazy. And again, at the end of the day, I'm like, if without the housing stock, it doesn't really matter how much money you have if there's not.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're not alone in being like, this is wonderful to have all this money, but being able to spend it that quickly in that short of a timeline and still follow some semblance of transparency and fairness is hard. So, yeah.
Right.
I don't think we need any direction from the strategic plan at this. We just really wanted you to know that that's kind of where we are. And I would say just for background, these funds were given to the county, not to the CoC. But Veronica's been really careful to involve the CoC as much as possible in that kind of process. But again, it was required that we collaborate with the CoC, but this is not distributed through the CoC. We still used a lot of our normal channels. We're still keeping the CoC, deeply engaged, but it is a funding source that was not typically, it's not typical that ESG goes to counties, but that's how they distribute it this time.
Megan?
Yeah.
Should we provide an update on our vision of how HHSA could use the ESG-CV funds? Because it is listed at the end of this, so I just wanted to make sure that the committee was aware. We'd like to retain some, because we can't respond to our own RFQ.
That's true.
So like one of the things that we're looking at is utilizing rapid rehousing funding through ESG-CV for tenants of Project Hhsa or the Live Oak Apartments that don't have other rental assistance support, so that they can receive that rental discount, and the county can reserve its program reserves to extend the program after ESG-CV expires. So it's kind of strategically using those resources so that we can maximize the benefit for the tenants of that project. We have HMIS lead expenses. Brian and Kirsty have been doing a lot of new programs in HMIS and new regulations and reporting. And so we've got internal costs for that. And also we've got an HHSA street outreach project. And so we just identified, I think it was $100,000 to just put in that bucket to reserve that. We're not exactly sure what it's going to actually cost, but that was our ballpark figure.
And this is kind of, it's a little bit complicated and we don't need to go into deep depth with this committee, but the challenge with using rapid rehousing funding for Live Oak Apartments and Project Hhsa is not that the individuals being placed there are many of them meet the definition. They are literally homeless. We are rapidly rehousing them, but there is a current prohibition on the recipient of ESG funds using those funds at a building that recipient owns. So the fact that the county owns the building is this kind of complicated roadblock that Veronica and I are trying to work through. So it's an unfortunate snafu in that Project Hhsa sites are very unusual that a county is purchasing a building. It's also unusual for ESG funds to be given to a county. So we've got this kind of situation here that we have to try to figure out with lawyers and conflict of interest stuff. So that's another kind of thing we're trying to work through. But Veronica's right. It is important to give you a heads up that there is, this is far less than 10% of the ESG funds that the county is attempting to reserve to be able to support very legitimate projects that the county's involved in. I don't think we have anything else really there, do we, Veronica? Okay.
No, that's all I have.
Is there any thoughts that the committee wants to share or things we should know or want to talk about?
I just want to say, I think it was a really good meeting, lots of information. So thank both you and Veronica for that.
I want to thank you for really engaging. Some of these topics, we were like, what are we going to do about this? And I feel like I'm leaving with some like, something to work with in terms of how to think about this, or at least understanding the issues. Like I think the conversation about the membership of the board was important, and I feel more prepared to have that conversation now at the board, which it's overdue. So it'll be good to have that conversation.
Good.
All right. Unless there's anything else, I think we're ready to adjourn. Veronica, do you see anything we need to talk about?
No.
Okay.
I'm finished.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. You have a good rest of your Monday, and I really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Okay.
Thanks. All
Thank
right.
you for coming.